Another day in the office. Okay, so we're getting close here. As you can see, our MDR terminal, it's got a bunch of numbers, but the one thing that's missing here is that we don't have any interaction with them. So let's set up a click handler. Let's console log to just the browser log, just like how we would in JavaScript. And let's see if we can get some sort of like interaction going with these different numbers that are in the grid. So if you recall, we have our web app here, our Yew web app in MDR terminal. So if we go back in here, something that I've done is I spent a little bit of time refactoring, not a lot, just a little bit. And so let's look at the number grid. I took a look at our HTML, and instead of splitting out all these for loops into separate functions, I decided to break up the two for loops back into the main component, which is just this number grid, and then take each of the rows. And then here I have a create cell HTML. So before we can do the click handler, one thing we want to do here is we want to make create cell HTML a actual like component, a function component with Yew, and then we'll pass in basically its coordinates or its grid index so that we can print that out in a console log after we click on it. So that's the goal. This is what we got to do. Let's refactor this just a little bit. So let's just take what we have here and move it down here, and we'll call this FN styles. It'll just be something that returns a style source, okay, like so. And then we'll go to the end. This will be an implicit return. I do need style source from stylist, so let's get that in there. Style source, leave the CSS in there for the macro. Cool, all good to go. Now, since the function is down below and we don't have a local variable anymore, I'm just gonna go ahead and make that a function call now. All right, we satisfied that part. Everything should be good. And something I notice as I'm going back and forth between the two files, something that I like to do is every once in a while, especially if I'm a little unsure exactly how my refactor has gone and I want to make sure that I've saved all my files and that I'm not breaking anything in other files. If you do a cargo check here, or a cargo C, right on the command line, it'll tell us if we're breaking things in the other files. So that'll be a good indication to us that maybe we need to go back and forth. All right, so the next thing we want to do is from Yew, we're going to want a function component, like so. And we'll make this a function component here. And instead of just keeping it like this, we're going to give it a name. We're just going to call it cell. Now, here's the other thing that we have to do. Notice we're getting an issue here now. So as we've added on function component, the macro, we have now an issue with the properties, so the props, and it's actually expecting a particular type. But what we want to do instead is we want to aggregate this all together in its own type. So that's going to be a new struct, and we'll just call it cell props. And we'll give it the content of Yew8, like so. And then what this needs to be now is props. And then this is going to be cell props. And we'll still get an issue because the very last thing we need to do is make it a reference to cell props. All right, and then down here, props.content, there we go. Now, the only other thing here that it's warning us is that we need to implement properties. So this actually also comes from Yew. So let me put that up here, properties. And what we're gonna do is derive that here. Derive properties. Again, as we follow the breadcrumbs of all the errors coming up, it's gonna tell us here that we can't compare cell props to another pair of cell props, and that's so that we can test for like re-rendering or something like that. So I'm gonna do partial equals, and we should get it also derived with Rust with our help, and a Yew8 can definitely have partial equals, so we're good to go there. So let's just double check any other files have issues. Yes, they do. So now we got to jump back to our numgrid file. And then now that we're in our numgrid, this cell HTML is not going to work anymore. Let's go here, and this now has to be a cell, capital C cell. And I'm just going to put this on multiple lines because we are going to add more props. Okay, like so. And we want the content to equal a dereference of the num. But then it's saying it can't find cell in scope. So let's see, could we import cell? Now cell is also a part of the standard library. So we want the one that's crate cell. All right, now I have made one more mistake. Again, we're following all the different breadcrumbs that Rust is helping us with so that we can get a running application, something that passes with the compiler. And so here we are, it says the content field is not available. So let me actually get this use statement from down below, put it up here. There. All right, so how do we get this working here? Let's go back to our cell. And we need to make this public. All right, cool. All right, so we made that public, but notice here we have another hint, and it's saying it's privately defined. So we got to make this public, the cell props. And I think this is all we have to do. We have here our cargo check. Everything good. Let's just also run and make sure that everything looks the same too. So we'll do our cargo starts. Here we go. Yeah, everything looks fine. Good to go on that regard. So now we've created this function to be now a function component. Okay. And we have our HTML that it's rendering, and then it's rendering the content. So the thing I want to do instead, and I went ahead and refactored some of the styles here, so I'll show that now. I want to make this into a button, and then when I hover on the button, it's just going to grow a little bit on the screen. It's going to be a little bit larger, and that way we can click on it. All right, so button. So if I was to take a look at our running app, we'll actually see a slight difference here with the hover state activated. Here we go. So here's our buttons. See as I hover on them. Now I can click on them, but nothing's going to happen. So our goal here is going to be get this in the console log. So I want to be able to click here and then see some sort of like print log here of like maybe what the content is that I clicked on. How do we do this? We're going to need some special help. We can't just use like a println. So for example, this here, this macro, this will not work. This doesn't automatically just transfer over to the browser. So we have to use something that has a bridge or a communication that can bind to the console.log. And to do that, I'm going to go to the cargo toml file. And I have a couple of things set up here ready for us to go. So I have web-sys here, and this is for the console log, but for WASM. And then we're going to be using some values here. So this WebAssembly bindings for Rust is the WASM bridge. This is where we get JsValue. And then on line 13, we have serde-wasm-bindgen. So that's where we can convert Rust types to JS values so that we can use them with log. So there's a particular function we can use. Now, a lot of the built-in types from wasm-bindgen JsValue will automatically be able to convert from one type to the other and bridge that gap from Rust into the browser. So we're going to do that example first. So here I go back to my cell, and we're going to do a console log, just something to get us up and running very quickly. So we'll do web-sys console is the module. Okay, so use web-sys console. I'll just leave that as the module up above. Now, every time we render, I'm going to go ahead and do a console log. So console log, the one we're going to use is just log1. So each of these numbers here are like how many parameters you can put into the log function. So in this case, I'm just going to have one. And what it needs to be is some sort of, well, right now it's just going to be a string. So it's going to be a borrowed reference to a str. We'll say click, well, actually we'll say render cell here. So I can't just pass it in here as a string. Let's look at the signature of log1. Notice here it wants the bindgen, a reference to the bindgen of a JsValue. So what we got to do is we have to turn this value here. This is essentially like a slice, and we want to go into. And using type inference, it'll know that we're going into a JsValue. So if you look here on the implementation, here it says from a T to a U JsValue. So that's essentially how we can get something over into a JsValue here through that bridge. So let's go ahead and do cargo start. All right, so here we are. So let's refresh. All right, so I got all these render cell here, and that's for all of these things that have been rendered out onto the screen. So it's not really helpful quite yet. Let's see if we can disambiguate this just a little bit and say like which number was rendered. So let's do that. So in order to get that, we're gonna have to get some sort of like JsValue type here. So what we'll do is let's use JsValue. So use wasm-bindgen JsValue. There's a couple ways you can do this. So we do JsValue from, and we'll do props.content. All right. Now, in order to add another parameter, we're going to have to actually increment this one. So I'll do the 2. And we'll do JsValue. Now notice even my autocomplete wants to do a borrowed JsValue, which is what we need to do. So we don't need to do the into because it's not another type. This automatically took this type. It gave it actually a copy to the from, and then it converted it into a JsValue for us to print out. So let's just see how this works. Cargo start, and there we are. Now we're rendering our cell, but we're rendering it as a number. So we're getting really close to something that we want to do, which is use like some sort of event click handler. So we're going to take a break from this console log for a moment, and let's actually import this callback. So now we need a callback to pass into the button. Okay. All right. So we'll do inner callback from, and here's our parameter, and then here's our actual callback code. It's going to go in here. Okay. So let's do a little bit of like what we did up here. Console log 1 cell on click fire. All right, and this is actually going to be some sort of event, but I'm not going to use it right now, so we'll just do the underscore. And this will be a mouse event, like so. Where does that mouse event come from? That comes from you. So again, I'm going to put a mouse event up there. We're not going to use the mouse event, but now we want to use the callback. Okay, so that's that inner callback here, and we're going to use it on the button. We got the callback here. Move that in the middle of the screen for us. So go on click equals inner callback, like so. Now that should work. Let's see that with our server. Cargo start. Okay, so we got our renders of all of our numbers. Now let's click on something and we should see another console log. Yep, there it is, fired. Another one. Here we go. So we're getting really close now. Now let's take this again a step further. Let's take out this render log here and let's get this thing, this JsValue, logged in here. So there's going to be a couple of things we have to consider if we're going to do this. So notice as I threw my code in here, we're going to have to refactor this just a little bit. Okay, so let's get this in there. And this is our JsValue, right? But here's the thing. So props content, this props content here, this actually came from above. it's noticing it's talking about lifetimes and stuff like that. So what do we need to do to the content to get this to work? So this is what I would do. So let's just do content as its own variable here. Props.content. Okay. And then we do like so. All right. So we're getting closer. Okay. And then props.content can be here, or I could just use content there. Now let's look at this next one. So closure may outlive the current function, but it borrows the content. So now we're talking about borrowing the content, which is owned by the current function. So let's take a look at the signature of this from here. Notice this is an FN. So it's not an FN mute or not an FN once, it's an FN. Let's do a move instead. Now, when we do the move, what this does is it copied this content here so that we could use it in JsValue. And then later on line 21 here, we can use it as the content of the button. So the content variable is now being copied into here and then being copied into there. So we're all good to go. And that's great for a U8. So that's good. Let's just double check that it all runs. Cargo start. All right, here we go. There we go. Got 6 and 4 and 9 and 0. Nice, all of them can copy. Now the last thing we're going to do here is we want the index from the grid to also be printed out on the onClick. So it's going to be a little tricky to get this done, but we're going to use everything we've learned so far, and we got to add on a little bit more capability for us to do this. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to create a grid index. Okay, and this grid index is going to be a pub struct grid index, like so. And it's going to have two U sizes, so it's going to have the X value U size and the Y value U size. Okay, and these fields are going to be public as well. Now, it's still showing that it's not being used, so let's fix that real quick. All right, so let's go into the libs, pub the mod, which is grid index, back to cell, now use create grid index struct. Now this is going to be one of the parameters that we put into here, so it's going to be public again. We'll just call it index, and it'll be grid index. All right. Now, again, we're coming up with some issues here. So we have the partial equals and we have the properties, right? So let's go to grid index. Let's get that on here. So we do derive partial EQ. Okay. Now let's go back. The last one we need to do is going to be for props. So it's got to have props as well being derived. So we do properties, and this is coming from Yew. Now the other thing I want to do real quick, I'm just going to plow through this, but we're just going to make a quick initializer. So we should be all good to go. All right, and let's do this. We need the index to equal a grid index new with an X and a Y. All right, so a couple things wrong with this here. Again, we're going to need to import or use our grid index. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now back here, we need an X and a Y. So how do we get this? So the first thing we do is go back to our iter, and we're going to do enumerate instead, which gives us a couple things. So we'll still have the row here, but then this is going to be our Y, and then this we're also going to enumerate, so we can get the index from here, and this is going to be our X. And don't forget to make this new. All right, so we're passing it in at the call site, and we have it here, grid index, right? Got the cell properties. So now let's get this index from the props. Okay, So notice here, we're getting another issue, and this is a good thing to learn here in Rust. So we can't move the index out of this shared reference because grid index does not implement copy. Now, it's very easy for grid index to implement copy, so let's do that real quick. That would be copy here. All right. And it's actually saying trait bound clone is not satisfied, and we can also derive clone. There we go. So we'll get a copy here, just like we wanted. Now it's saying it's not being used as a variable, so we're going to use the variable in here. So I'll say index JsValue. Okay, I'm going to do a JsValue, but here's the issue. From, what's it going to be from? How could we do this? Index. That's not going to work. So notice here the trait bound grid index from, and then a JsValue. There's a couple of ways we could do this. I say this is what we do. Remember our cargo toml file? We had this one, serde-wasm-bindgen. Then we also have this serde here, and this is going to be for serializing our custom struct so that it can be used with a function that's inside of serde-wasm-bindgen. So let me show you how that works. So let's go back to grid index. So what do we do here? Use serde serialize, okay? And then we need to do serialize here. All right, so we have serialized, so we're getting closer. Now if we go back to our code that we were looking at, so this from looks like it might start to work, but still not. We're going to use something a little different. Let me show you this import here. So we had the bindgen for the JsValue, but now let's do a serde-wasm-bindgen, and we have toValue. Let's see how this works. So let's take out this here, and let's do toValue of the index. Okay. There we go. It has to be a borrowed index. Now we have the index value, right? All right, so now what do we do? Well, you would think, okay, we have this index value, right? But here's the problem. So toValue actually returns a result. So it has some sort of serialization issue, or it's a JsValue. So in our case, instead of doing like a check for the result or whatnot, like I know with our example, it's always going to work. So I'm going to use unwrap. And let's change this to be 3 now. All right, so we should get this to work. Another way you could do this is you could do like an if let and sum, okay, like this. Pass this in here. But now we only do the console.log when this serialized just fine. Oh, and the other part is we need to do a dot okay here to get that value. So that's one way we could do it. So we went from like this result type into an option type, and then we got something out of it, and then we're going to print it. So it's a lot to do, but you know, if I'm just debugging, I probably wouldn't write code quite like this. I'd probably just do the unwrap. That way I could find out what the value is and move on from there. But this is kind of what we want to do for now. So from here, let's double check everything works. Okay, and let's see when I click on 8 what it shows. All right, so it was, we had the onClick fire, we got the 8, and then we got our custom struct here. And that's what toValue automatically gave us. So we're on our way to adding our click handler. So in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to take this onClick and we're going to move it up to the parent, and we're going to pass some data, custom data, not just the mouse event. But we're going to pass some sort of custom callback in the props so that the num grid can control what happens when you click on the button. All right, if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments below or give a like if you like what you saw. I'll do my best to answer your questions. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.